we will start with the lesson learning. The objectives of learning are nothing but to understand the definition of and purpose of learning, theories of learning and different methods employed in the process of learning, and also different types of learning by everybody. First, we will go ahead with the definition of learning. What is learning? Human beings learn innumerable things whose prevalence is sometimes to the present and sometimes to the past or future, and it may have no any relevance at all, and learning can simply be defined as to learn is to know about to do something and not to do something, but this definition is inadequate. Learning is a process not confined to only formal education at schools or colleges, but it is the continuous process by which we acquire various interests, habits, knowledge, skill, etc. Thus, when a certain stage of learning is reached, a corresponding change in behavior occurs. This change will take the form of completely new patterns of behavior or an improvement over the existing pattern of behavior. When complete learning has taken place, the best way of responding to a situation becomes permanent. Thus, learning results in addition, change, modification or stabilization of knowledge or behavior. Learning is the most common form of human activities. Almost every minute we learn something or the other, with or without being of it. Learning also involves different types of methods. After going to the definition, the theories of learning. What are the theories of learning? Psychologists have developed various theories of learning with several points of agreement and disagreement. However, all these theories may be classified under two headings: the connection model and the cognitive model. Psychologists who have subscribed to the connection model claim that all learning takes place through the establishment of connections or associations between stimulus and responses. The cognitive model goes beyond the stimulus response connections and emphasizes cognitive processes like reasoning, memory, insight, etc., which lead to learning. All these theories are supported by evidence from laboratory experiments. Most of the psychologists working in this area have relied mainly on the findings of laboratory experiments on animals and humans to arrive at their theories and generalizations. The very first theory of learning is sign learning. The theory of sign learning was given by Tolman, and according to him, animals and human beings do not learn response by repetition alone or because it has been rewarded. Learning, claims Tolman, takes place by cognition. Cognition includes concepts like knowledge, thinking, planning, inference, purpose, and intentions. Behavior is generally goal-seeking in nature, and because of this goal-seeking nature, it has a molar character or a totality and defies analysis into specific elements, units. The associationistic theory states that organism learns a series of movements in a correct sequence. These movements are released under appropriate conditions of drive and environmental stimulation. This learning is obviously mechanical, guided by reinforcement and repetition. Tolman disagreed with this concept and argued that the organism follows certain signs and clues to reach a goal. It learns its way by following a sort of map, and it does not learn only some of the movements but also their significance and meaning. Hence, this theory is called sign significance or sign learning theory. According to this theory, learning is guided not by reinforcement or repetition but by active cognitive processes. Tolman argues that many learning situations do not permit clear distinction between the possibility of learning by connections and by cognition. If there is a single part with food at the end and the organism runs faster at each opportunity, there is no way of telling whether its response is being stamped in by reinforcement or guided by the purpose and cognition, because stimulus response and sign learning often predict the same behavior and outcome. Now first we will go ahead with what is reward expectancy. In this experiment, Tolman he used monkeys, and the monkeys were watching a banana being placed under one of the two containers, but was not allowed immediate access to the same. A few minutes later, it was permitted to choose between the containers, and it invariably demonstrated its memory by choosing correctly. So later, when these monkeys was out of view, the experiment placed a lettuce leaf, preferably which is not food, less than food, under one of the containers. On finding the lettuce leaf instead of the preferred banana, the monkey showed signs of surprise and frustration. They rejected the lettuce leaf and engaged in definite searching of behavior as if looking for the expected banana. Similar behavior was found when food in the goal box of a maize experiment was changed from barnache to sunflower seeds. This shows that only animals channelize their activities depending on certain cognition which is already formulated. And next, place learning theory. In this, the experiments on place learning were designed to show that the learner does not move from the start to goal according to a fixed sequence of movements, which are connected to each other as prescribed by the connection and reinforcement theories. Movements can be adjusted, changed to suit the conditions. To prove that the organism does not learn a movement sequence but an overall path of cognitive theories, in their experiments tried to disrupt the movement of the organism. In one experiment, the maze, in which the rat learned to run correctly, was flooded with water, but still the animal swam through the correct path and reached the goal. Similarly, in another experiment, rats that had learned to run straight through a maze were surgically operated to produce a cerebral damage. Once their cerebrum was damaged, they could not run straight and ran in circles. And when these rats are left in the maze, they are still unable to run without errors. Obviously, this shows that the organism does not learn mere movement sequences but the correct path. The next learning part under sign learning is latent learning. It is nothing but a learning which is emphasized that the animals learn just by exploring maze without reward or food. Cognitive theories claims that if reward or reinforcement make the organism learn, then the performance of the reward organisms should be better compared to the performance of the ones which are exposed to the same learning situation without reward. So, in order to test this hypothesis, Tolman planned an experiment. In this experiment, he allowed rats to wander through the maze for 10 trials without food. He then divided these rats into two different groups, one only of which was fed each day in the maze. This group showed a clear reduction in errors and time taken to reach the goal. It compared to the non-fed group, but when the food was introduced for the latter group also, error and the amount of time taken rapidly decreased, and the performance of the both groups became immediately comparable. Thus, the non-fed had apparently profited as much by the earlier trials as the fed group. The obvious implication of this experiment being that learning was taking place during the trials when the rats were left to wander without reward. And however, this learning was revealed in their performance only after the introduction of the incentive for reward. Tolman referred to this unobservable learning as latent learning. Learning by insight. It is usually stated by the connection theories that learning involves a gradual and continuous strengthening of association between stimulus and response, and this becomes stronger and stronger due to reinforcement. This assumption is challenged by the concept of insight postulated by Wolfgang Kohler, a famous psychologist. He provided a classical demonstration of insight learning in apes. A hungry ape was confined in a cage, reached through the bars of the cage and obtained a banana. The banana was moved out of the reach and the ape was given a stick. After some perceptible trial and error behavior, the ape soon learned to reach with the stick and pulled the banana close enough to grab it. Then the banana was moved twice as far away and it was given two separate sticks that could be joined to form one stick long enough to reach the banana. Wolfgang Kohler observed that under this condition, the ape spent some time grunting and pacing. Then, without engaging in any practice, the ape spontaneously joined the sticks and obtained the banana. The ape tried repeatedly to reach the banana, first with one stick and then with the other. When it failed to reach the banana with either sticks, the ape gave up the effort and started playing with sticks. In the process of playing by chance, one stick slided into the other and one large stick. Immediately, the ape took the combined stick and pulled the banana. The two sticks, which were earlier perceived as two sticks, now came to be perceived as a long stick, a change in cognition and insight. And this occurred suddenly, spontaneously, and without any connection with the previous attitudes. The ape was running through the possible solutions covertly and acted upon the one that was seemed most likely to work. The result of such a process is at times a sudden familiarity, clarity and understanding and success of relationships. It may be in the form of a sudden idea or a solution popularly known as aha experience or insight. Some of the characteristics of insight are: they are cognitive in nature, structuring and restructuring at the cognitive level, learning is not at all mechanical, occurrence is sudden and spontaneous, learning is sudden, learning is permanent and there is no need for repetition. The impact of this theory on psychology was tremendous, and this may be understood from its experimentation. Another learning after insight learning is observational learning. Observation of others play a very critical role in our learning, particularly social learning. Bandura, a leading social learning theorist and researcher, through his research work demonstrated the occurrence of observational learning among children. In one study involving dolls, he showed that children who watched a film with a person being punished for ill-treating a doll played much less with the doll than those who did not watch such a situation. In other studies, it was shown that children who had watched adults being aggressive towards some dolls themselves later on tended to be more aggressive towards others. Children tended to behave in the same way as adults do. This can be considered either as observational learning or imitation. Studies have shown that the effects of observational learning are very strong and long-lasting. Studies by Brian, Mewson and Eisenberg and many others have shown that children who have learnt certain forms of behavior by observing others tend to retain these for a long time, and such observationally learnt behavior tend to reappear after months of gap. The importance of observational learning has been clearly brought out by a number of investigators on the impact of television programs, particularly on violence and aggressive behavior. There is very strong experimental evidence to show that children learn many things, particularly aggression and violence, because of indiscriminate exposure to television programs. According to Bandura, observational learning involves 4 components. The first is attention. This means observational learning can take place only if the observer is closely attending to what is being observed. Having attended, the person has to retain. Thus, retention is the second component. Further, it is not enough if one attends and retains but should be able to reproduce. Reproduction is thus the third component. One should be capable of reproducing. Finally, above all is the factor motivation. One does not retain or reproduce or perhaps even attend unless there is a strong motive to do so. The next topic is transfer of learning. Transfer of learning occurs when learning in one context or with one set of materials impacts on performance in another context or with other related materials. The main purpose of any learning or education is that a person who acquires some knowledge or skill in a formal and controlled situation like a classroom or a training situation will be able to transfer such knowledge and skill to real life situations and adapt himself more effectively. If this does not happen, then any exercise in learning or any system of education is an utter waste, because no individual is going to spend his entire lifetime in the psychologist's laboratory or a classroom or a training institute to learn on each occasion to solve his problems. The purpose of any teaching learning interaction is to bring about a generalization and application of what has been learned in specific situations to real life situations and acquire a general capacity to adapt. Let us now go to methods of learning. There are mainly 5 different methods of learning: trial and error method, conditional response, learning by insight, learning by imitation, and transfer of training. The first method is trial and error method. This is the most primitive and simplest way in which learning occurs. Placed in a new situation, and the individual makes a number of random movements. Those which are unsuccessful are eliminated and successful ones are fixed. It is learning by blundering, by trying something and succeeding or failing. The second is conditional response. This theory was evolved as a result of the experiments by Ivan Pavlov and Watson. It is a process of substituting the original stimulus by a new one and connecting the response with it. Pavlov carried out an experiment on a dog. He used to ring a bell while giving food to the dog. When the food was placed before the dog and the bell was rung, the saliva would secrete in the mouth of the dog. But it was also seen that when the bell was rung only, but the food was not given, the saliva started secreting. Pavlov called the response a conditioned reflex. In learning by the conditioned response, there is no choice or freedom. A good part of the learning of early childhood is the result of conditioning. The third is learning by insight. Gestalt psychologists opposed the trial and error method. They argued that learning is not a blind and mechanical process. It involves insight into the total situation. In learning, we use our sense along with the motor activity. Learning by observation is learning by insight. Learning by perceiving the relationship in the scene and understanding the situation. After looking over the whole situation, the learner strives to make some sense out of it and gives him clues regarding the way he should proceed to solve the problem, the method he should pursue, and general awareness of the consequences of performing an act. The fourth is learning by imitation. Imitation is one of the most important means of learning. Human beings consciously or unconsciously imitate the actions, manners, and styles of his fellow being. A child learns to walk, talk, and behave as his parents or brothers do. It is important, therefore, that the first model should be worthy of imitation. Imitation does not crush originality. On the other hand, it is the first stage in the development of individuality, and the richer scope of imitation, the richer development individual will be. The next is transfer of training. Transfer of training means that training is transferred from one skill to another. It has special significance for all kinds of the industrial training program. Stated simply, transfer of training deals with whether or not learning in one situation will facilitate learning and therefore performance in subsequent similar situations. There are three possibilities. The first is positive transfer. Learning in one situation enhances learning or performance in new situation. The next is negative transfer. Learning in one situation inhibits learning in a new situation. And the last is no observable effect. Let us summarize. Theories help us to explain or predict behavior, inform policy, guide practice, and direct research. Theories of learning helps us to understand the basics of learning involved in human behavior. In sign learning theory, the concept of learning takes place by cognition. Cognition includes knowledge, thinking, planning, purpose, and intentions. Many learning situations do not permit a clear distinction between the possibility of learning by connections and by cognitions.